Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our interview with Karola Obermüller. I'm Beth Ritte. I'm the Artistic Director of the Boston New Music Initiative. We're really excited to have Karola today. She's a colleague of mine at the University of New Mexico. She's a German citizen working here in the United States and kind of does work in both places fairly often. I'm just going to let her talk about her music, and then we'll have a little more discussion afterwards.
Great. Thank you very much, Beth, for having me, and BNMI for having me. It's my great pleasure to share a little bit about my thinking about composing and how I approach composing. So I will start by sharing my screen. Exciting. And let's see that I do all the right buttons. And oops. Go away, Zoom window. There. Yay. Okay, so title, time, timbre, and transformation. And I will try to hit all three topics, so to speak, but they are really very interconnected. And so I will kind of talk about all of it all the time. The quantum mechanics of dream music, funny little subtitle that you might be confused about, and hopefully not so much anymore after my talk. Okay, we will start with a little quote. This is from Yehudi Menuhin's thoughts on Indian classical music from his autobiography, Unfinished Journey. Life and death are not all and nothing, but stages in a process, episodes on an infinite river to which one trusts oneself and all other phenomena. So it is that Indian music reflects Indian life, having no predetermined beginning or end, but flowing without interruption through the fingers of the composer-performer. The tuning of the instrument merges imperceptibly with the elaboration of the melody, which may spin itself out for 2, 3, or more unbroken hours. Why am I reading this quote? It actually does have to do with Indian classical music, since I got the chance to visit India and study Carnatic music and then Hindustani music just for, a month each approximately. But this was around the age of 22. And I had already composed quite a bit since I started as a child, but it did influence me a lot. Just having this completely different way of hearing and thinking about music and also composing music. And this concert experience, it was very much like that. You go to an event where music is being played, and there isn't any perceptible beginning and there isn't an end, and people talk, and people then, slowly start clapping the thala with the music, and they still talk and eat, and it's all, life is just happening. And there are, of course, moments where, there are concentrated and maybe more silent than in other moments. So it's kind of it fluctuates, but it is very different from the Western music experience. And having grown up in Germany, that was all I knew up until then. So from that, these are just some words that I extracted from actually this quote. And those are, I can find these concepts and words in my music from before my time in India, and also, through nowadays. Not always equally important in each piece, but they keep coming back. And there are more. These are just a few stages. I'm really interested in stages of material, for example. And I'm very interested in how that can influence form, musical form. And that leads me to layers. I love working with layers, and layers are often materials in different stages stacked on top of one another, and the whole thing, the process of that. And with process, I also often think about things in nature and how they happen. And for example, geological processes. You can find layers of different rocks. Here in New Mexico, where I live, you see them when you go out in the nature. And he also mentioned infinity as a very important concept in Indian classical music. And that led me to thinking about time and how time flows. And I keep finding myself wanting to not treat time linearly, but like a spiral, for example, or zooming into time as if I could, make time flow. I mean, I can in my individual perception, time flow differently at different speeds, dilate time. And it actually isn't anything that is new. Bernd Alois Zimmermann, the German composer who died in the 1970s, he coined the term the spherical form of time, and he was thinking about past, present, and future as being all one, and especially in music, how you can go back and forth and it goes in all directions. And quantum mechanics and physics tell us that this is actually very likely a broader concept. So it's very exciting. I try to follow that a little. Anyway, flowing is another concept that comes out of these thoughts, the flowing of time, but also the flowing of sound. And he talked about the tuning of the musician becoming the piece. And so that is not so much so far with beginnings and endings of pieces. I have, played with that a little bit, but I've played a lot with actual tuning, different ways of tuning, and merging that. That's where the layers come into play again, and merging of layers, merging of stages, etc. So time. Well, let's look at time a little more now. And time can be fluid. I would say time is fluid, and this beautiful painting here is in my teaching office. So I talk about it very often, a Miro. And I mean, of course, it's not the original, unfortunately, just a print. And I think it's a beautiful visual representation of what time, if you read it horizontally, but even in other directions, the fluidity of time and pulses really that we can see that are, irregular. And that brings us to the first piece. I will just share a little bit of that with you when we're thinking about time and pulse. They don't always go together, but in this case, I was drawn to the concept of pulse. And this became a piano solo piece that I composed. I started in 2011 and I finished it so far in its current state in 2017. So quite a long time. And that happens with a lot of my pieces, that I start them and then they sit like a layer, like a geological layer, and then something else later gets added. So this piano piece is called Pulstastung. Pulstastung can be literally translated as pulse touching, meaning feeling or taking someone's pulse. But it's despite being a medical term, Pulstastung actually is a quite poetic term and carries with it the searching for, the feeling around for the pulse, where you cannot be sure that you will ever find it, either because it doesn't exist anymore. And this isn't, I'm not really thinking about, human beings or animals so much, but, more of a larger living entity, maybe, because you're unable to locate it. You're like feeling around for it. It could be that you're, feeling around for it in a tree. Obviously, a tree, you can't feel the pulse, but I love that, there's life inside. So this kind of idea of feeling for it. And 3 movements, we will only listen to the first one. These 3 movements for piano solo are related to the feeling I had coming from Germany. This was basically in 2010. I had been living in the US before, but not in New Mexico. And then I had a little pause. I went to Germany for 8 months or so. And then coming from Germany, suddenly finding myself inside the vast, breathtakingly beautiful New Mexican shrub steppe desert, high desert. I arrived with these old pulses inside me that got poured into the vastness, sonically manifested in this process. There's the word process again. In the first movement, the old pulse is the piano part of Robert Schumann's Lied Im wunderschönen Monat Mai. It is so very hidden that it might appear to a listener familiar with Schumann's Lied as a kind of cloudy memory, too vague to name exactly, but present enough to feel familiar. Even when one knows specifically that the song is there, it hangs in the air, a suspended note, a contrapuntal motion, just beyond grasp, pulling you deeper into the web of relationships. Then we will not listen to second movement and third movement, but basically I'm taking the first movement and I'm pulling it apart. I'm zooming in, and I'm then throwing more inside it. So in the second movement, there is Bach, a Goldberg variation that gets kind of inserted in. And then I take the second movement, I pull it even more in time, and other old pulses go in, like Hildegard von Bingen and Machaut and Beatrice de Dia, etc., and Ravel. Anyway, we don't have time to listen to the whole thing, but here is, so you can get a little refresher. Here is the piano accompaniment to Im wunderschönen Monat Mai. Sorry. So here's the first 2 pages of that first movement, and we'll see, maybe you can hear it. Here, we'll go back to this in a minute. Since we're talking about time mostly here, I wanted to point out the pulse. You heard, it's not, you probably wouldn't immediately think that this is like a groovy piece in terms of like pulse equaling groove. No, but so this is the pulse, as a dry version of that piece, just pulse. Or you can think about heartbeat here, one accelerating. Here it is. And now we'll go back to the piece without that annoying pulse. So that was first movement of Pilztastung. Now to a different piece, which again, we're looking at through the lens of time, but we're now moving into the timbre as well. And this quote is nice in that it makes that connection. Hyperkinetic music built out of crisp, high-pitched notes. She says, has much of that insect's dodged diligence, while the changy intervals and microtones act like a microscope, focusing the listener's attention onto a world teeming with tiny but determined life. And this was cool because just by her hearing that, she got that zooming in idea that I do in this, that I'm dealing with in this piece as well, Myamecia. Myamecia is an ant, and it's quite poisonous. And so the microscope idea and the zooming in idea has a lot, obviously, to do with zooming into time. And when I do that, and I, really literally think about this, and I actually well, this was more about writing big scores, but I also have a magnifying glass that I like to use for music notation. So it kind of is really funny. But yeah, the microtones are immediately visible, at least in my imagination. I'm zooming into music, I'm zooming into spectrograms, and I start seeing and I start hearing microtones. So I had to, in a piece for harp, guitar, and dulcimer, I had to come up with a different tuning system. So this is my very loosely based on just intonation, my tuning system. It actually is loosely based because it doesn't sound anything like that, and I deviate from it. And I also have 3 different tuning systems. So it's just how I came up with some of the starting material. And we won't go into this like in detail, but you can see beautiful with these instruments, you can actually determine the exact amount of cents you want to deviate from your well-tempered tuning. And with some luck, it stays like that for the entirety of the piece, which is like 9 minutes long. And so you have, this super exact, beautiful, tiny, this world of microtones and like this world of, the tiny instruments teeming. I thought that was a good description. So here is the first chord. We won't see the notation for this one, but here is the first chord of the piece in first in well-tempered tuning, and then in the tuning that I used. And then that same first chord, just note by note with some sustain, which we don't get in the actual piece. Okay, so we will just give this a short listen, and we will not listen to the entire 9 minutes. So I'll stop after a little while. So timbre becomes extremely important. And of course, as I said, everything is related to each other, to one another. And therefore, it's hard to make these separations. But the zooming into the microtonal world here then becomes a lot about timbre, because I have these 3 instruments with 3 different timbres, and I'm kind of magnifying that by giving them the different tunings, and also then, of course, in my composing, where I will often use not just one kind of B, but like the 7 different kinds of Bs that I have, or Cs or C sharps or so on. Anyway, here's a little bit of this piece. Sorry, that was a very abrupt stopping point there. I think all of these pieces are online if you want to listen to the whole thing later. You can find them, I think, mostly on YouTube. And, on a CD, but who buys CDs? So jumping to basically the third term transformation. And again, this is linked to time as well as timbre, but also very much to what I said earlier about my love of layers and my love of, or my thinking about time being, very much like Bernd Alois Zimmermann, like the spherical form of time, toying with that concept. This is a piece that is for singers, and we will only listen to the beginning. In it, I'm just, using old materials again, but this time not in a kind of pulsing way, but I'm using Guillaume de Machaut, Messe de Notre Dame, the Kyrie, and I'm using it as a sort of scaffolding, as one of the deepest layers of the piece upon which I stack things. So this is the actual Machaut. This is sung by Ensemble Organum. If you haven't heard of them, they're amazing. So here's my piece that I called Mass Distance Time. There you have all my fascinations in the title. And you can hear it, I think, pretty well at the beginning. It becomes a little harder later on. We'll not listen to the whole thing once again. Again, this is, you can find this online. Here, interesting here on the first page, you can see how I deal with microtones in this piece. And again, it is a lot about zooming in, and my idea that by zooming in, I see more and more microtones that, it becomes more, and the resolution becomes higher and higher, so to speak. So it begins exactly with my perfect fifth that the Machaut begins, that we just listened to. Okay. Just the beginning, and I think one is able to hear that Machaut kind of somehow as a kind of a cloud in the background once again. So coming to the dream, dream logic is beautiful, and there's now more research about this. I feel it being very connected to all of these processes of like making time stop, making time move slower, zooming in and seeing more and more pitches, microtones, you know, having time flow like a spiral, or having memories of older things floating around and maybe, you know, future things that I hadn't heard yet. Anyway, so the piece I'm again just giving you a snippet of actually did kind of start with my naps, and when I take naps, which doesn't happen every day, but I love naps because first of all, they're awesome, but also because when I am inside a piece, I do actually often dream these solutions to problems that maybe I don't even know that I had them. And this is a piece that was made to kind of commemorate Ernst Bloch, a philosopher. And so I imagined him dreaming his philosophy, so to speak, which is a very complex, beautiful work. And I was just taking verbs from his texts, some of the central verbs, and then I ordered them in some way. And so anyway, in this piece, those verbs take on a life of their own. They breathe and sound and sing. And we'll hear the beginning again. And here, this actually kind of points to something else that is extremely important to me, that is rooted in all of the things I've talked about, which is really utopia. And this can or does often manifest when I do opera or, you know, theatrical works. And in the sense that the impossible is possible. It is in your dream, but I do strongly believe that utopia is super important and possible in the way that, you know, I believe in it strongly. To say it with a German author, Ingeborg Bachmann, who will be 100 years old, but she's already dead, but whose 100th birthday it is in, you know, 2026. She said that I know that it doesn't actually happen, but I believe very strongly in it, utopia. So for her also writing was an act of dreaming of utopian ideas. And so yes, we'll maybe very briefly look at a music theater work, but utopia is a central thing, or was, for Ernst Bloch, this philosopher. So this was composed for a festival that was called Concrete Utopia, like, you know, Manifest Utopia. Anyway, we'll listen to the very first bit, and I think you can, this is a little bit, you know, no, it's not funny, but that the dream and its connectedness with the act of sleeping, I think, is very apparent at the beginning, quite kind of literally. So Bloch Dreams is the title. Okay, sorry, again, not listening to whole pieces mostly. Speaking about the utopia, and really also, again, about, past, present, future, and time in general. This is a little info page from Wikipedia about Sophie Scholl. That's the person that I wrote my last opera, my most recent opera, about. She was a major figure in the resistance, the little that there was during Nazi Germany, and she would have turned 100 in 2022. So, in 2021, but because of the pandemic, we had to delay this, of course. So anyway, it was performed in 2022, I think. In, time. I have no concept of time, apparently. But anyway, Sophie Scholl and her brother, Hans Scholl, were important, really the founders of the White Rose resistance movement. You might have heard about it. Of course, it's very important to people in Germany because it's one of the few, there were some resistance movements. So we have lots of schools named Scholl, Geschwister Scholl Schule or Sophie Scholl Schule. Anyway, I will show you just a trailer of this most recent opera. And I haven't subtitled it yet, I should do that. But basically, thinking, why am I using the word utopia? I think it is, the way that she thought that I find so stunningly amazing, that she was in this situation, probably knowing that she would be killed for going into the resistance, but she still had that strong utopia, and she knew that this wasn't right, and she, was brave enough to throw information papers, like leaflets, and that was when they were anti-war, it says here, right, anti-war leaflets, and that's when they were caught and then executed. And she painted anti-Hitler messages on walls together with her other members of the group. So really incredible. And she started out as just a normal girl who was, like the others, forced to become part of this youth Hitler movement, because they were all put there unless they were Jewish or not deemed fit for it, in for whichever reasons. But so she was indoctrinated and brainwashed, but of course she had parents who were very critical of it, which helped her. But the whole, all of those siblings really made that switch to becoming aware that this isn't right, and then going in to the resistance. Anyway, so we tried to paint this in the opera. This is what it has for me to do with utopia. And also the time issue here is interesting, because in the opera we did insert a contemporary world that was reflecting on Sophie Scholl's world. So if we had these two levels of almost like a time traveling opera, but we weren't traveling from one to the other. It's just that the one singer that was the main singer was Sophie Scholl, as well as the contemporary 16-year-old. And so one important aspect was that we didn't want to put any Nazi on stage. And there is the word Hitler in it a couple times, and there's never music, and it's not sung. It's only spoken. In the trailer you will hear, and this is where the layer idea comes in to place, you will hear old music in this opera as well. For instance, I used a chorale by Pretorius, because Sophie Scholl was very Protestant, and so there was a direct link, and Michael Pretorius had written this in commemoration of two young men who were also executed back in his day for speaking the truth. And so that's in there. And there's also a famous song that Sophie played on the recorder outside of the prison where her father was for a couple months, 4 months maybe. He had to go to prison because he had said something about Hitler, and someone told the Gestapo. So anyway, she played this song, and it's a very well-known song in Germany. Die Gedanken sind frei, thoughts are free. And that's in there too. Anyway, we will, there are also a couple letters. The whole text is really like based on what Sophie wrote, because there's a lot that we have today, letters and so on. And that I think can be just the last bit I will show you. And then we can open it up for questions. So this is just, as I said, it's a trailer. It doesn't really give you the full picture of the opera, but it's a taste of that. And it does touch on the things I do in my chamber music that somehow I find myself doing in opera as well.
Du findest sicher, es wirkt lächerlich an einem Mädchen, wenn es sich um Politik kümmert. Sie soll ihre weiblichen Gefühle bestimmen lassen über ihr Denken. Ich finde aber, dass zuerst das Denken kommt und dass Gefühle oft irreleiten. Und eines habe ich mir abgewöhnt: das Träumen von Dingen, die mir angenehm sind.
Die persönliche Freiheit, die persönliche Freiheit, die persönliche es gemeint? Warum also diese feige Ausrede?
An die Angeklagten Hans Fritz Scholl und Lina Sophie Scholl ergeht folgendes Urteil. Tod durch Fallbeil. Das Urteil ist sofort zu vollstrecken.
Das ist doch Widerstand, oder? Etwas tun gegen Unrecht, gegen eine viel stärkere Macht, obwohl man weiß, man kann dabei alles verlieren, sogar sein Leben.
Oh, thank you so much, Karola. I really want to see that opera now. This is fascinating, just on every level. Did you write the libretto, or did you work with somebody?
Exactly. Yes, we worked very closely together. She is the Ulrike Schumann. She is the opera. How would you say it in English? Opera dramaturg.
Librettist.
Yes, but she is also. She actually
Director.
Yeah, she's a kind of an opera director, but she doesn't like. It's not stage directing as a dramaturg. You know, she like oversees the whole opera productions of that theater where it was produced in Heidelberg. So it was beautiful because we worked for a long time very closely together. And we also met a biographer of Sophie Scholl that we were able to interview, that really stuff that that biographer had written a huge book, but there was of course stuff that wasn't in the book that we were able to ask. And Ulrike also knew all the singers and all the orchestra musicians and everyone in the theater and like the stage, and we were able to have meetings. And the pandemic was even kind of while annoying, also a good thing because we had a lot more time. We were able to, you know, do kind of a stage rehearsal of material I had written, and then the pandemic happened, and then we were able to actually have more time to sit on that and develop it more fitting for that place and space.
Yeah. Oh, so cool. So let me think. I had a couple other questions. So when you were talking both about the pulse and then also kind of like the microtone idea, like talking about zooming in, I'm kind of curious, you know, like with the pulse where it moved, and also like when you did the microtones, is this something that you kind of come across like organically, as in like you're kind of experimenting and trying things, or is it more like kind of planned out in your mind before you do it?
I think it's both. I often do both, and I go back and forth, and very often pieces start with an initial idea, and very often that is an auditory thing. A piece I didn't show, but that kind of has that, actually started with the cicadas, you know, those really loud animals that we have here in the backyard. Beautiful. And I was so fascinated by those. So I heard them all the time, and I recorded them, and then I looked at the recordings. And I zoomed into the recordings, and I saw this pulse happening. And it's kind of, you know, doing kind of what I do in music already, just like this animal is doing it. And it actually, then I researched it, and, you know, it has kind of a timpano inside its body that it's like hitting just like super, super fast. But it is irregular if you zoom in. So anyway, that became the basis for a piece that's called Coiling and Swaying. And so I did, once I had this kind of recording and, you know, information and so on, at that point, I actually did plan things in the piece and for the piece. But up to that point, I got to that point by experimenting and playing around with stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay, cool. What the other thing, oh yeah, so the one thing, listening to a bunch of your music, I just really noticed, I can tell like that timbre is really important. But one of the things I noticed is that there's a lot of your music has this like really loves bright timbres, like really bright, sort of like not really with an edge, but just and there's, I think it has to do with some of the microtones and stuff. Just it rings in a really beautiful way, a lot of it. I'm just curious, yeah, is that something you have thought about or noticed in your own music?
That's interesting. I don't think about that, like, I will want to have colors or anything. I think it maybe is something that happens more along the way. I do think about register a lot. And depending on what instruments I have, I also plan that sometimes I don't. But yeah, I think it depends. It's a little bit like the face of a piece. I'm just trying to think if there is something that is more emphasizing lower registers. I think in my orchestra pieces you can probably find sections of that, but yeah, I think you are definitely right that as soon as I have the opportunity to have multiple instruments play some kind of sonority, a chord of some kind, I will often use some kind of inflected microtone of some sort, sometimes very specific, sometimes not so specific, or a deviation, like a variation of that, like a multiphonic or something. And that will often result in that kind of right color, I think.
Yeah. So one piece that I listened to this morning that I was really fascinated by was the is it Becoming Phosphorus? This one for English horn, solo English.
That is different forms of phosphorus. Yes.
Different forms of phosphorus. That's right. Sometime I have to see, we'll have to chat about what I love the sounds and the different sounds in that piece. And I was like, there's times where I was like, is this a English horn? Yeah, it was fantastic. And especially the end. I loved the ending sound, like on that piece. So yeah, that was just kind of an aside about that. Let's see, Tian Yi Wang gave us a question. Does the zoomed in microstructure of pitch and rhythm, for instance, inform the larger structure of the work?
It does, yes. So, very much in the piece that comes to my mind is, of course, the one that I didn't talk about, the coiling and swaying piece, where I use the cicada timpano beats also as a, macro form for the whole piece. I don't think it's audible in that piece. I'm thinking the other ones in My Amicia that we didn't listen to in its entirety, that is a little bit audible too. What I didn't mention is that I use Indian tala, Indian rhythms there, just like Misya, but differently. But it is also something that you will find like compressed versions in individual instruments, and then you find it if you look at the whole piece where we got some of those sudden silences and then restart, and then later on the chords get reintroduced in that piece. So the way that those are structured in the entire duration have to do with some of those Indian rhythms that you hear in their fast form, but then you perceive them maybe in the form, in the overall form in the 9 minutes. But I don't always do that. It does. Let's say maybe more often I start with that plan, and then somehow something happens in the big plan. There's an insert going into it or something, and then that messes up my stuff, which is fine. I'm not like, there are composers who have to have the Fibonacci series there and it cannot be disturbed or so, as a little example. I'm fine with life getting in the way and that being thrown off. If it isn't like, the super important DNA bit of the piece.
Mm-hmm.
But question because I do love those connections, and it, it's part of the the individual thing being connected to everything else, which is very much the main idea of the piece you mentioned, the different forms of phosphorus. Yeah, so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, that idea of it being big and also little, it gives your pieces a really great cohesion. I felt like that's what Tianyi says, but I also like heard that in like, I don't know. It is like the way that you talked about your music. So it kind of, so I've done a lot of study of the music of Harrison Birtwistle, and he talks about how he thinks of it, his music of like, it's like a parade going by and we only see part of it. And I kind of see a sort of a similar thing in the way that your music is. It's like we're looking at something in a specific way, maybe really up close, but then also farther away. But also it's like a microcosm of a bigger whole that we're not seeing, but yet it's still contained in its own way. And that really, the way that you talked about it and your music itself really gave me that idea and impression.
Cool. I'm happy to hear that.
So we are out of time. I just want to give a great big thanks to Karola for a wonderful presentation. I loved hearing about all your work. And then I'll give a plug for our next composer interview series, which is going to be with Evan Williams on May 18th at 1 p.m. Eastern time. I'm thinking Mountain time. 1 p.m. Eastern time on May 18th. You can you can sign up for that at bostonnewmusic.org/tickets. And I think that's it. So thanks again, Karola.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. My great pleasure. Have a good rest of your day.
All right. Okay.